we were in a civilian ship, and they had 3,000 men in that. And we were given brand new rifles, and they were packed so they wouldn't rust from the factory. They were packed in what they call cosmoline. It was a grease so they wouldn't rust. And now we had to clean those because you had to get that cosmoline and that grease out of there so that they would fire all right. We landed in England and we were sent to Lahore, France, and from there they took me out on the front lines. And as we were in there, I said, what are we doing tomorrow morning? The guy said, well, we'll meet you a foxhole buddy, and he was in before. He'll let you know what. So as we were going down, it was about 10 o'clock at night along a French road, and we got in a stretch of forest land, and someone said, halt, who goes there? And that's what was going to be my foxhole buddy. And they said, we have a man here for you. He's going to be your foxhole buddy. So he dropped us off in there and said, you're in with the First Division now in combat. So, and that was in somewhere in Belgium. Well, we were sent to a hedgerow, and we had to cross a field to the house. But there was a fellow in the house from the upstairs window that was firing on us. So we organized until we made the rush, but everybody left at one time. Yeah. And as I remember, to get to the front line from the foxhole, we rode on top of a tank for a couple, maybe 100 yards or so. It wasn't much until we got dropped off on the very front line. Ready to make the charge.
So, what was your very first combat experience like? What do you remember about it?
There wasn't a whole lot to it. We would rush a town, and at the time, now we were talking about January of 44 and 45, I'm sorry. And the Germans had pretty well started to give up at most places. They were running out of ammunition. They didn't have any control, but they had a fight to the end, but they didn't know. Didn't have it. So they were giving up pretty easy. And then we prepared for the next town that was doing the same thing. And sometimes we'd go through towns, never fire a shot, because they were giving up as soon as we got there. Now, normally, our artillery would fire ahead of us on the town and try to drive them out. And I guess it did so because most of the time we didn't find too many people there anymore.
So let's move to March 24th. Start from the very beginning. What was happening that day?
Well, that particular day, we heard that we had gone through a couple of towns with no firing, nothing. And what happened was the Germans wanted time to dig in and be ready for us. So they had set up in this place called Yugareth, and that was the town we were going to take. And they had machine gun firing across the field that we had to cross, and heavy equipment. They had 88 heavy artillery, and we had to cross over into that. But before we had the runoff, we were located in a barnyard in the house. We were between the house and the company, the whole company, waiting for the word to charge. And we knew they were dug in and they were ready for us. But one of the last, they were hoping to be one of their last good stands, I guess. They said we were about 45 miles from Berlin at that time. But before we wanted to fire, there was about 50 yards out in that field, there was a foxhole, and there was a German in there, and every now and then he was firing at us while we were standing in that barnyard. And one of GI said, "Hey, cover me, keep him pinned down in the foxhole, and I'm going to go out and come in from the side and capture him." So that's what we did before we make the charge, because we would have had to run out right into him. And he went out and he made motions to stop firing, and he went up there, and he went up with his rifle pointed there. He was maybe shot and killed, or maybe when we were firing into foxhole, maybe one of those bullets got him. We don't know, but he calmly turned around and come walking back to the group that was waiting to charge, and he got within 20 yards of it, and he dropped. Well, he was shot by a snapper someplace, we don't know, because after that we just started, and as we were going across the field in a group, they had open machine gun fire on it, and heavy artillery was hitting it, and about 50 yards from the first house that we could get into, there was a crater from a bomb shell crater, and I dove in there for protection. And when I drove in there was another man in there, and the group kept going, and we were in there, and I could hear bullets hitting the dirt. I said to the fellow that was in there, and I didn't know who he was. He was a stranger to my, whether he was from our group or not, I don't know. And I said, we're sticking out here. I'm going to get out of here. He said, "No, I'm staying." I got up and run out. Now I'm on the only field, the man on the field anymore. And I could see the bullets, the machine gun in the dirt right between my legs. I never got hit. And I went into the house and right down in the basement for protection. And there was about a dozen or so GIs down there ready. And they were zeroed in with heavy artillery, 88 is what they call it, 88 millimeter. And one of them you could hear them come in with the whistle, and you could tell by the way they were as it was dying down whether it was going to be close or just overhead. You probably wouldn't drive if it was really high, a miss. We never even bothered to duck or anything. But this was the first one hit outside, and I said that was pretty close. And everybody, there was two rooms in that basement with an adjoining hallway, and we were in the right hand side, and that's where that first one came. You could tell it was coming from that side, and everybody wanted to get out, and were pushing through the doorway to go over in the room and to the left, and the second one hit and was a direct hit, and it blew my hand off. So I went to take a step, and I was I was all numbness. I didn't know what was. So I had more pain in my face. It felt like the side of my face was blown away. But I had 3 stitches under my nose here, and I could feel blood running down. And I took another step, and my hand came up, my arm came up, and there was no hand there, just 2 fingers dangling down. And I looked at that, and the first thing I said, I'm never going to play baseball again, because I didn't know it wasn't a hand. And there was no hand around. It was just 2 fingers were hanging. And luckily, there was a squad medic in the basement and a second lieutenant, which we never had in our group. What are the odds, And I called for a medic, and the lieutenant come over and looked at it, and he said, "Hey, medic, let that guy alone over there." There was more of them injured, and he was already starting to treat him. And he said, "Let that guy alone. There's a guy over here needs you more." So the medic came over, and he started bandaging it up. He put a compress pad to try and stop the bleeding, and 2 of those fingers came out in the back here, and he was trying to put him in there, and the lieutenant said, "Those fingers are in your way, why don't you cut them off?" It's, sir, I'm a squad medic. I dare do nothing but first aid. I can't do any kind of surgery or cutting. well, he said, I'll give you an order, cut him off. That's an order. And I said, and I didn't remember this day. I said, you might as well, because there was nothing left there. I could have gone like that and clean. So he cut them off, and then he bandaged me up. And there was a field hospital about a block away, a civilian hospital. And we were all when we had cleared the town, we were all going to get together for our next move. But they took me over there. They couldn't get me out that night anymore, so I laid in the basement of that house all night long till they could come and get me. The next morning, two fellows came with a stretcher and wanted to take me over to that hospital where they had ambulances and jeeps lined up to take us back to the MASH hospital. And the next morning they came with a stretcher and wanted to know whether I could walk. I said, yes, I'm sure I can walk. And they said, well, we'll help you walk. You can get down there a lot faster with you walking than carrying you in a stretcher. So I said, I agree with that, let's go. And they took me down there, and in the lobby they had at least a dozen stretchers laying with men that were wounded. I couldn't see how much they were wounded or anything else, but then they came with, they didn't have ambulances, so they had jeep with racks on for stretchers, two across the back and two across the hood of the windshield. When they took me out, there was one across the windshield, at the windshield and at the hood, and I was the next one in front of across the hood. Then they had one in the back, on a rack, and they needed one more. So then we were laying out there, and you could hear the shells. I will say one thing, that the Germans didn't fire on the hospital itself. They were religious about that, I think. And they were close enough, though, that we wanted to get out of there. So they finally came up with the last one. Now they're in a hurry. And they took off, and my rack hopped off the rack. It hit a bump, and it hopped off the back, and I caught the other stretcher and held on to it and hollered, because when that hit that bump, that really hurt. And the guy that was with him as the driver, the driver, he told the driver, yeah, let's slow it down a little bit. They put me back on the rack, then they took it a little more easy. So they took me back to the hospital, to a MASH hospital, where I was treated and able to leave. They just got enough, they couldn't close it up. There was nothing there anymore, so I had to go through another operation later on. So,
how much pain did you feel when they had to take your fingers?
Nothing. There was no pain when he yanked them off. Of course, there was no contact with the body anymore.
Oh.
It was just skin, and the rest was open flesh. And you could see that there was nothing to close. There was no skin left. They knew you had to take more bone out, and now I'm amputated about 4 inches above the wrist.
And so, what was the recovery from that like, the surgery?
That went pretty quick in the hospital. It wasn't bad. I got home around April the 3rd, I believe, and they put me in a hospital down in Atlantic City. They had made hotels into hospitals during the war, and that's where they took me for my next operation. So I didn't have any kind of pain. They took care of things pretty good. You know. They gave us a lot of penicillin for bacteria. I got 64 shots in 8 days. Every 3 hours around the clock for 8 days.
Wow.
Before the operation. Then after the operation, I got another 64 shots.
And then how soon did you get the prosthetic hand?
They made the first one in the hospital. They had a machine shop in the basement of one of the hotels, and they made a prosthetic for me to wear with, and I had a hook on it and it had a mechanical hand, but I had to operate with the harness across my arm, and it wasn't too successful. So,
Now, before your injury, were you right-handed?
no, I was left-handed all my life.
Well, that was fortunate.
I started school in a one-room schoolhouse in 1920. Well, I was born in 26, so it would have been about 20, I would say maybe 30, 31. And we had a one-room schoolhouse with eight grades from 1 to 7, 1 to 8 rather. And we'd have penmanship, and you had to draw circles, and the teacher would come back and twist my ear and said, "Put that pencil in the other hand." We wanted me to do it right-handed, so I'd put it in the other hand. As soon as he'd leave, I'd watch him and make a circle, so I didn't have good penmanship. But they didn't ever change me, and the army never tried to change me either. I think when my brother went in at that time in the National Guard, they made them shoot right-handed, and the M1s, which I had over there, and they were semi-automatics, and as you would fire them, the clip would fly out, and I would fly past my eyes, on the right side, and it was hard to get used to, but they never tried to change me, and thankfully they didn't, because I did pretty good in the rifle.
Exactly. And I'm guessing that made your adjustment to losing your right hand a lot easier.
Exactly. I know one thing, whichever hand you would lose, it's always better to learn to do things with the hand that you're accustomed to. And I was so left-handed, it couldn't change me in anything. Even button my shirt or anything. Everything was left-handed. So.
What did you do after the war?
I got a job working in Lancaster at RCA. Now RCA was the same as General Electric. They made televisions and radio tubes. They were really active during the war. The government had taken over that factory to make tubes for what they needed for, like radar and oscilloscopes that they made for the government. So it wasn't. And I worked there for 34. My wife and I both worked there. She worked there 26 years. I worked 34.
Wow. What are you most proud of from your service?
The most proud of it is that I can say I did my duty. So many times people come to me today and say thank you for your service, and I appreciate that, and that's as far as it goes. But when they come to us and say you're our heroes, I can't take that. I was over there and I saw the heroes. They didn't have the privilege of coming home and have a civilian life anymore. I'm not a big hero or anything. I don't want to be a hero.